Hello, I'm Shona Madden from Madden Law, and this is one of a number of videos in a series that details all of the parts of a contract for sale when you are buying a new build. So if you're buying a new build, the contract that you're going to get is in fact going to be a contract to buy a site, also to employ the developer to build the house for you. So it can come in as two separate documents, the contract for buying the land and a separate building agreement. Or it can come in as one combined document, which is a combined contract for sale and building agreement. So I'm going to go through some of the important parts of that contract. One of the important areas that people often ask about is when the house will be ready and how is that dealt with in the contract, especially when you're buying a new build. That is very important. You could be signing the contract at various different stages. You could be buying the property off the plans, or in fact the property could be completed. Even if the house is completed, you'll still be signing this contract to buy the land and employ the developer to build it for you. And they're the terms that are used in the contract. The person who's buying the house is the employer under the building agreement, and the contractor is the developer who's going to build the house. One of the important clauses in the contract is referred to as the completion date. And this is probably one of the first questions that people ask us when they come in to review the contract. What does the contract say in relation to when the house is going to be ready? No doubt the estate agent or the developer has given the purchaser some indication of when the house will be ready. But the way the contract will be drafted, and it's the same for every house that's been sold as a new property, there won't be an actual completion date in the contract, even if the house is in fact completed. There will be a completion date as defined in the contract, but it doesn't in fact have a date. The completion date is more like a procedure for triggering the completion date. So the completion date is actually under the contract, which will be standard for all. It says it's the earlier of the date in which the employer, which is the buyer, shall agree in writing that the works have been completed, or the date upon which the employer shall receive from the contractor a notice in writing that the works have been completed. And then the closing date is 14 days after the completion date. So what that means is there's a mechanism for triggering the completion date. Under the contract, what should happen is that the developer's solicitor should send a written notice to the purchaser's solicitor to say that the house has been completed, and the closing date is 14 days from the service of that notice. What happens more often than not, though, is that the fact that the house is completed is communicated verbally, either from the estate agent or from the developer, sometimes directly to the purchaser, and thereafter the closing date is 14 days from that communication. So people often ask, is there no end date? If there's just a mechanism to trigger the completion date and the closing date, is there no date in the contract? Could the developer go on and on in terms of delaying the completion of the house? All contracts for sale will have a completion period in it, and it will either be 18 or 24 calendar months. So there is an end point by which the house must be ready under the contract. When the contracts come in to the purchaser's solicitor, they come in duplicate, and the purchaser will sign two and send two back to the developer's solicitor. When the developer signs two, his solicitor will then hold on to one and return one signed contract to the purchaser's solicitor. So at that point there is a binding contract for sale, and it's from this point that the completion period starts. So if the contract says that the completion period is 18 or 24 calendar months, that time only starts from when the purchaser's solicitor receives that signed contract. So I hope that was helpful in dealing with the kind of completion elements of the contracts. Have a look at the other videos that I have down below, which will detail the other parts of the contract for sale when you are buying a new build property.